Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something very different than usual because in this video I'll be talking about the Canon RF 51.8 STM. Also quite a mouthful name to say, but it is, kind of a fun lens to use, and the reason that it's very different is because usually I talk about things that I really like to use, but in this case this lens is a lens that I really like to use, but if you've been following my channel for quite a while now, I really don't like 50mm with all my heart. Of course, could sound a bit hypocritical considering I have the 0.95, f1.2, f1.4, f1.8, f2, and also for Sony, for Canon, for Minolta, for a lot of brands out there already 50mm, but in this video I would still like to share my thoughts on this particular lens with you in case it might just help you, because there are so many reviews out there, so why not just give a little my thought video on this lens as well. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Canon RF 51.8. Now this lens definitely resembles a lot of its design features with the 51.8, the EF counterpart, but it also looks very similar to the 16mm f2.8 as well. I think they're just using pretty much the same shell and the focus ring and kind of the same mount as well, because this also has a metal mount, and the weight is actually also very identical with just minor bit difference. But I think that the overall design, I think to save cost, it is very similar. But talking about cost, it is a little bit more pricey than the EF counterpart, the STM 50mm f1.8. That being said, if you're starting out and you don't have the adapter yet, I think that this lens is still a good lens to look at. And in this video, just as usual, I'll be dividing it into three different sections. The first one is going to be about the usability, the ergonomics, then leading down into the image quality, and then into my conclusion. So let's first start with the ergonomics and the usability. So the ergonomics and the feel of this lens is actually quite light, as mentioned earlier, but it's also quite decently built for around 200 euros, give or take, depending on which part of the world you live. This lens comes with the metal mount, and also the weight is actually quite decent. It's not going to get blown away by a wind. It definitely feels very nice in hand when it comes to weights, because if you compare to the earlier EF version, not the STM version, but the earlier EF version, the 51.8, that under 100 euros lens, that definitely felt very light, and if you drop it, you could probably break it. Whereas with this one, I don't recommend you drop it, but the plastic quality definitely has a very nice feel to it. And unlike the EF version, because this is the RF version, the focus here is actually dual purpose. One, you can use it as a focus ring, and the other option is you can use it as a control ring. So for those of you who doesn't use the lens so much for manual focusing, you can always set your control function on the actual lens control ring itself, just like any other RF lenses, from all the L lenses, the RF version, to just the normal non-L lenses version on the RF mount. You can just customize the focus ring itself to do other features. Some people do it for aperture, some people do it for, or set it to ISO settings, things like that. I personally just left it at focusing system because I think that there are enough dials and customized menus on a lot of the Canon cameras already, the modern R version, so that I don't really find the need to customize mine. But otherwise, this lens, it's a very compact lens, and also I think that it's a lens where you don't need to think about bringing it anywhere, because it's both very light and also very small, yet well built, that you're not worrying about it too much, which is good if you're packing a lot of gear in your bag. Because with some light lenses, if you're packing a lot of gear in your bag, you will just just constantly think that, okay, maybe it's gonna break the lens, maybe not, I don't know. But this lens, you don't really have to worry too much about it. And moving on to the next point, which is the focusing system. The focusing system in this camera is not bad. It's definitely not the fastest, but it's actually not bad either. I think you can definitely track semi-fast moving subjects, or if you're just doing like simple sports photo shoot, it will definitely get things in focus. That also depends on the actual R camera that you have it mounted with, of course. If you mount it on the R100, for example, I think that the camera's autofocusing system won't be that fast enough to drive this lens to focus accurately on fast-moving subjects. Whereas, you know, with something like the R5, the R7, the R10, what have you, those cameras will definitely be able to focus really quickly and accurately with this particular lens. But talking about autofocusing system, there is definitely that autofocus, well, actually focus breathing rather, whether if you're in autofocus or manual focus. And though in photography it doesn't really matter that much, but in filmmaking, if you're doing a lot of videos here and there, and if you're focusing between really close subjects and really far subjects away, or vice versa, you will definitely see that focus breathing, and it could be quite distracting, and it also could look very cheap in your production. But if you're just doing normal videos, I think that, you know, it won't really affect you that much. Just if you're professional, it will definitely be very noticeable. That being said, I think that focusing with super contrasty situation, this lens definitely can hunt or actually hesitate a little towards the very last distance of the focusing range. So let's say if the camera definitely notice where or which distance to focus on the nearest or the furthest subject away, but if the contrast is very high, the lens will actually hesitate the last few millimeters of that focusing distance. So just to keep that in mind, it can look a little bit irritating if you're focusing that for video, but in photography, it doesn't really matter that much, but I just thought, why not just mention it? But otherwise, in normal situation, it's actually a very nicely focused lens. It definitely focused very quickly for the most part, and yeah. But the downside about this lens, though, is not its autofocusing system, but its aperture blade. Being a little bit more expensive than the EF counterpart, I thought that they would at least add in better aperture blades, like more aperture blades, at least 1 or 2 more. Because even the Yongnuo knockoff of the earlier EF version has more aperture blades than this lens, and that lens costs like, what, 60, 70 euros only? And, you know, this one only has 7 blades of aperture built in inside, and I wish it's just more. If you stop it down to, let's say, f2.8, f3.5 and shooting portraits that way, you will definitely see your bokeh not being circular enough, and that's just, yeah, I wish that it would be better designed in that way. But of course, no biggie, because generally I either shoot at f1.8 or all the way to f9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. So yeah, those are definitely the aperture range that I'm shooting between. So yeah, but for those who are shooting portraits a lot with f2.8 with this kind of lens, or even f2.5, you might start seeing your bokeh balls not being super circular or perfectly circular. So just to keep that in mind. And yeah, the focusing noise on this lens is also another downside if you're shooting video. If you have the recording sound from the built-in camera, or if you just have a shotgun on top, you will definitely notice the sound. But if you're, you know, filming a video like this, but just instead of having the microphone on top or underneath the camera, you have the microphone on your actual shirt or on the talent, then you will definitely not hear the focusing noise. And yeah, that's pretty much it about this particular lens. There is no weather sealing, there is no image stabilization built into the lens, but that is to be expected at this price point. So I think that that's just neatly lead into the image quality. The image quality of this lens is actually pretty nice, I find. It is definitely a little bit, just a tiny bit sharper and a little bit more contrasty than the EF STM counterpart, but just ever so slightly. But what I like about this lens is I find that the focus plane, you know, with really cheap affordable lenses, sometimes the focus plane is not perfectly straight, whereas this one is almost perfectly straight and kind of fall off a little bit around the corners. Personally, I don't mind a lot, because if I'm shooting with this lens, I'm either stopping down to like f9, f10 anyway, where everything will be more in focus, or just shooting at f1.8 where I don't really mind the corners to be blurry or blurred out anyway. So there is that. But to some people, they like to shoot everything in focus at f1.8 in the same line, and the corners could be a little bit out of focus. And talking about corners, it is actually quite soft, and there's some ghosting and vignetting or color fringing into the image as well at f1.8 all the way to around f4. It only gets a little bit better at around f4 and above. I would say that if you want to get kind of like peak image quality out of this lens, shoot between f5.6 to f10 or sometimes f12, depending on the sorry, f11, depending on the you know, the lighting condition. But otherwise, you know, it is to be expected, and I think that it definitely outperforms many lenses that cost around 400 or 500 euros even, because the overall image quality and the characteristics out of this lens is still quite nice. And if you're shooting against the sunlight or against some sort of really harsh direct light into the lens, the contrast actually doesn't decrease that much. You know, it still maintains its contrast very nicely, just decreased ever so slightly, but still, it's very, very impressive for this lens price. Well, the price of the optics. And also, you will get lens flare when shooting like that, but it's not distracting kind of lens flare. It's not glamorous lens flare either, it's just normal, decent lens flare that you can live with, or you can just use it to your creative use with. So that's quite nice. And the sun starburst effect is also not that elegant, but it's also still natural to look at. So that's something that I really like out of this lens as well. The distortion is manageable, and of course I tend to use the built-in correction anyway, so I don't really see a lot of that. So that's actually pretty okay. And I do like a little bit of, you know, vignetting as well when shooting with this kind of lens, because I shoot a lot of portrait. And yes, this is just a snapshot kind of lens for me. It's not professional. I don't use it as much as my f1.2 here. But when I do need to shoot, let's say, f1.8 with it, I don't mind having that vignetting. In fact, I do add vignetting later in post anyway. So there is that. But otherwise, I really am impressed with the quality of the optics from this lens. It's pretty good. And that, I think, just leads into the conclusion about this lens. So this lens, if you already have an EF adapter, and if you want to, well, the R and EF adapter, and if you just want the cheapest alternative to this lens as possible, or the cheapest 50mm f1.8 as possible, then I would say the Canon EF counterpart, the 51.8, it would be a much better choice than this particular lens, because that lens you will still save a little bit of money. And to be honest, even though this lens is slightly contrastier and also slightly sharper, but you won't really notice that much of a difference when you do an A4 and A3 print, or if you're just looking at images of it on Instagram or on your social media or what have you, you won't really notice that much of a difference at all, really. So if you want to save a bit of money and you have the adapter, go for that lens. The build quality is also very good. But if you're starting out and if you don't have the adapter yet, because the adapter also costs money, I would still say go for this lens. It's a very nice choice to go for if 50mm is your thing. Earlier when I mentioned that 50mm is not really my focal range, I really don't like it, and I think it's just personally really based on where you started your prime lenses with, you know. For me, when I started taking photos more seriously with prime lenses, I started with the 24 1.4, which means that to me that is a standard lens. It's not a wide angle, it's not a telephoto, it's standard. And that's why I find that, you know, 50mm is the weirdest focal range that ever existed, because to me it's not a standard lens. It tries to be wide, but it's definitely not. It tries to be telephoto, but it's not at all, none of those. I know it's not trying to be that, it's just its own focal length. But, you know, when other people say it's a standard focal length, to me, I just personally feel very different, but also respect that, you know, why other people think it's a standard focal range. To me, ultra wide starts from around 10mm full frame all the way to 15. Standard wide starts from around 16 to 20. 20mm is what you're seeing in this video right now. It's a 21.8. So a standard focal range is between 24 to 35 for me. And then 50, super weird. 70, even weirder. 85 is the beginning of telephoto for me. But you see, that's where I'm coming from. But anyway, I'm digressing. But yeah, overall, I do recommend this lens, and it is definitely a fun lens to use. And when you do have this lens, you'll find that this lens is pretty much a lens where you can just take it anywhere you go, because it's a lens that is very light, it's very small, very practical as well. So yeah, all in all, I really highly recommend this lens. There are flaws, as mentioned earlier, with the focusing, and also with the fact that it's not really weather sealed, though it is expected, and also the fact that it does have a little bit of lens flare if you are, you know, into it or not. That's really on your aesthetics. Yeah, but overall, I think that the benefit of this lens really outweighs the flaw of this particular lens itself, and I hope that this pretty much helps you somewhat. So yeah, I think that it's pretty much a nice place to end the video. So thank you all very much for watching. If you have any questions, any suggestions, anything to share, any recommendations, feel free to just comment that down in the comment section down below. If you want a free photography guidebook or want to watch my free video tutorials or some paid ones, it's also on my website. The link is down in the description section below as well. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.